Corey, what are some of the telltale signs when you, let's say, have a student in one of your classes that they're using this old model that it may just be 3 years, sort of an outdated way, but what are some tip-offs?
So when I work with writers, I separate story design from story execution. So story design is this. So if you were going on a vacation and you wanted to have a romantic, relaxing vacation, and you ended up in a war zone where people are literally getting killed, there's no room service because everyone's dead bodies in the pool, can you have a relaxing, romantic vacation? And the answer is you could, but it's very unlikely. If you go to a very relaxing, romantic resort and everything's perfect, that doesn't guarantee that you'll have a relaxing, romantic vacation because you still have to have the vacation and you might be stressed. You might be thinking about work. You might be having a fight with your partner. But if you go to a very relaxing, romantic spot, you get there in a, you fly first class or you take a night train through Europe and the design of your vacation is just perfect, it makes it so much easier to have a relaxing, romantic vacation. The mistake that so many writers make is they have a problem with their story design, but they try to fix it through execution. So that's like, you're in a war zone, let's turn the volume up so we don't hear the dead people as much. Let's take the dead people out of the pool. Yes, that does make it better, but just leave and go to Hawaii and you'll be in much better shape. So I always start with story design to make sure people, I'm sorry if I could back up. So the key is when someone's having a problem with their script, is it a problem with design or is it a problem with execution? Because other writers will have a great design, but they'll mess it up in execution, get feedback that it's not working, and throw their design out. So if there's a problem with design and you keep trying to fix it in execution, that's like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. But at the same time, you might have a great story design, but you just aren't able to find the right execution. So I'll often do a consult with someone and the script's pretty good, but the ending's terrible. And when I talk to them, it always comes up, we're like, well, that's not my original ending. And I go, what is your original ending? And when they tell me, I'm like, that's a great ending. Like, I know, but everyone said it, I didn't believe it, it was everyone had criticisms. They were criticizing the execution, not the design. So sorry, I'm taking the long way around to the question, but so when I'm working with story design, it's when someone is working from a formula or a paradigm or a set of rules, first of all, you're just not interested when you hear it. It's incredibly predictable and it just feels generic. It feels like an IKEA piece of furniture. It's like, I've seen this story a million times. And the other key thing is at some point, I'll just stop them and I'll say, why does this happen? Like, why did the character do this? And the real answer is because the writer wanted or needed or felt like they needed the character to do this. So it's not authentic, it's not organic, and it's not the best way of telling the story. It's literally following a recipe.
Okay, so how are you, I'm fascinated by this, so let me just see if I can understand the difference between design and execution. So design is like the structure of it and they're doing this perfect sort of 3-act structure, but it's too predictable, whereas the execution are the little details?
No, so execution is actually when you're writing. So it's the dialogue, it's the characters, it's the comedy, it's the actual writing of it. The design is having the entire story worked out before you've written a word.
Okay.
And you need to be able to create pitch perfect design and then execute it authentically, where these are real characters that we're compelled with and everything that's happening feels this is really what the character would do, but it also is what's really interesting to the story. Because the problem that a lot of writers get into is if they slowed things down, they'd realize that there's key points in their script where they ask themselves, if this was a real person, this character, what would they really do? And let's say it's this, they would do this. Then they ask themselves, from a story point of view, what makes for the most interesting story? And it's that. And so some writers will just do what the character would actually do, and their scripts feel very organic, but they're not strong stories. Other writers will follow, oh, this is what makes for the best story. So they have good, strong structure, but it doesn't feel organic or believable. So one of the key skill sets, and so when I work with writers, this is the first thing that I teach them, and I think that this is the foundational skill set, and I call it creative integration. And so the way it works is writers tend to work from one of two places inside themselves. And it has to do with the brain. And there are a conceptual part of the brain and an intuitive part of the brain. And most writers tend to be more conceptual or more intuitive. So conceptual writers tend to work outside in. They tend to be very concerned about the story, that the story is logical, that the story makes sense, that the story is interesting to other people. Conceptual writers are very concerned about what other people are going to think about this writing, and will they think this is good? Will they think I'm a good writer? So they want really interesting things happening. And they want a lot of interesting things happening, and they want it to make sense, and they want it to have causality, and that's really, really important to them. Intuitive writers are completely different. The intuitive part of the brain doesn't care what other people think. It just cares about what is authentically true to you. So intuitive writers are navigating towards what they would do in that situation, or just what's interesting and compelling to them, or what the character would really do. And it's a very different way of writing. One, the conceptual is outside in, and the intuitive is inside out. So a conceptual writer would say, I have this great idea, and I've got to figure it out. I got to break the story before I could write it. If you don't know where you're going, how are you going to get there? It's a very systematic, logical approach to writing. The intuitive writer is going to be someone who says, I need to write this out to figure out what the story is. They find it through the journey. They find it through exploring. Intuitive writers explore. Conceptual writers decide. And they each have different inherent strengths and weaknesses. So let's start with conceptual writers. Conceptual writers, when you ask them, why did you write this? Why is this script important to you? It's almost always a big idea, a what if, something that could be commercial, a new way of doing a comedy. I thought this was a great idea for a horror film. Or it's a theme they want to explore, an intellectual theme. And so they're really good at big ideas, big concepts. And they're really good at making sure everything happens for a reason, and there's forward momentum, and there's causality. And they have lots of interesting things happening that we're just not that interested in. And one of the reasons we're not that interested in it is their characters are never compelling enough. Their characters feel kind of like they were invented to tell this story because they were. They're kind of like puppets who are there to tell the story. And we just don't get an emotional connection to the characters. The other reason that they hit a glass ceiling they can't get through is there's all these interesting things happening in the script, but we're not that interested in them because we don't feel anything. Because the writer didn't feel anything when they wrote it. And it's an energy transference business. So conceptual writers got great ideas, lots of big, great things happening, but the characters just aren't where they need to be, and it's just not emotionally engaging. And most of those writers know that, but they don't know what to do about it. Intuitive writers are the opposite. They bleed on the page, and these characters are like real people to them. They don't invent the characters, they don't design the characters, they discover them. And that's why a lot of intuitive writers don't often get lonely when they write, because they're spending time with their friends. They're spending time with people that they care about. And so if I'm working with a conceptual writer and the character's not engaging enough, they'll say, well, what can we do to change it? Should we make her older, younger? Let's make her bisexual. Let's change her ethnicities. Let's take her arm off. Let's make her a quadriplegic. What can we do to make her... If I'm working with a deep intuitive writer and their characters aren't interesting enough, that would be like talking to a mom and saying, your daughter's not that popular at school. Let's take her arms off. Let's make her a quadriplegic. Let's make her older. It'd be like, that's crazy. This is a real person. You can't change who they are. Intuitive writers, like, they're very connected to their characters. And then as a result, they tend to create really compelling characters, really compelling emotion. And these really compelling characters are forever searching for a compelling story they can't find. Because the intuitive writer is so inside out and so connected to emotion and character, that part of them cannot create strong story. It's the conceptual brain has a perpendicular processor, and it has a certain way of thinking and strengths and weaknesses. The intuitive brain has a parallel processor. And anyone, if they're interested, you can email my assistant, which is lisa@corymandell.net, And we can get you a bunch of information on this if you're interested. But to take this further, what happens is most writers, if not all writers, when they're writing, they're trying to write the best script they can write. And if you're smart, and writers are very smart, you play to your strengths and you hide your weaknesses. So if I was playing tennis against you for the championship and I'm really good at my forehand, but I'm weak at my backhand, I would try to play everything to my forehand and hide and you of course would try to make me play my backhand. So writers are always writing to their strengths and trying to hide their weaknesses. And maybe they know they're doing it, maybe they don't, but they're doing it. I see this all the time. And so what happens is over time is their strengths get stronger and their weaknesses get weaker. And that is why there's so many writers who pour heart and soul and all this time and energy to have a career, and they can't get there because their scripts aren't quite good enough.